Darkness seeped into the cracks of the abandoned structure, crawling like a living thing into every shadowy recess. The flickering lights of the perimeter fence cast eerie silhouettes, while the screaming wind howled through the ravaged streets like a chorus of the damned. It was as if the very fabric of the world was unraveling, and Amara stood at the eye of the storm, her senses screaming for escape. She shivered, despite the fire crackling in her palms, its warmth unable to shake off the creeping chill. Her eyelids drooped, their weariness urging her to surrender to the void, but she fought it back, pleading with her exhausted body to linger. The fragile thread of her sanity threatened to snapped frequently by the turmoil swirling around her. Amara took a few shaky steps forward, her calloused boots squelching in the damp mud. Her fingers instinctively shifted, curled into a defensive grasp, each hand an extension of her unrelenting will to survive. Two fractured lights hung crookedly in the distance, flickering like fireflies swayed by a cruel breeze. She froze, squinting, trying to discern the telltale signals guiding their path forward. But even when the sun rises over the pitiful heaps of what once was, she muttered, aloud, a rasping sound that waked the fire in her core. It leaves scars on every soul we used to be. What do you want to call that? True selflessness. Willing hearts surrendering their soul to destroy while other people live their lives trying to find refuge in their sacred slumber. This pain hurt. Like too much, and that faint scar the dark corners are looking forward to see come out in the open, for in fear lies power. A distant rumble shook the walls, leaving Amara bracing herself against the harsh certainty that settled inside her like lead. Power does build, it spreads. The dark clouds gathered and gather before the storm, and their eyes are trained on her. Lena, our sharpshooting rebel, an elemental storm brewed in Amara's eyes would form an impermeable scar once, and for all Amara's eyes met the unwavering gaze of Lena, and for a moment the storm raging around them seemed to dissipate. Lena's expression, once a mask of defiance, now radiated a calculated warning. The air was heavy with the weight of secrets, whispers hidden in the shadows. With a slow breath, Amara countered Lena's unspoken threat, her voice barely above a whisper. The words, laced with defiance, hung in the balance like a razor's edge. What do you propose we forge from this trial, Lena? Broken hearts or sharp edges? Lena's grip on her rifle tightened, her knuckles pale against the stock. A choice between those, Amara, is yours alone. But know this, when the storm breaks, I'll not be there to hold the fragments together. The words stung, like a cold breeze on a winter's night. Amara felt the glacial dread seep into her bones as the tempest within her began to rage anew. She pushed the emotion down, acknowledging the reality. Survival depended on accepting the darkness, even embracing it. For a fleeting moment, Amara wondered if she had become just another pawn in the grand battle for power. Her loyalty to the rebellion waned, replaced by an indomitable will to choose her own path. However, the faint doubts lingered, fueling the simmering discontent. Memories of her past, where everything was black and white, swam to the surface, distracting her from the jagged battle ahead. She recalled snatching roses in the forgotten gardens of an old world, where children played without fear, oblivious to the tumultuous world beyond their tranquil haven. Tears, welling up in her eyes, blurred her sight as she pushed them back. With an uncanny balance, Amara walked a thin line between reason and madness. No decision could be taken lightly. Rebellion had left her streets scarred, and the losses still festering wounds each victim a piteous reminder that even without ideals, their ultimate goal remains elusive. Within Amara's heart, her conviction began to dissolve like sand at the rim of a forgotten hourglass. She strained every resource left, until an ominous insight could be pieced together. Inherently born to despise what she perceived as decay, her fragile desire to maintain control remained the sole constant. As harsh light broke across her thoughts, and with it, the resounding certainty dawned. Could Amara, after eons battling for something she no longer had faith in, stand against the void and create what was destined to come, a path that stripped the entire world of the familiar comforts she once knew? of the things that no longer existed. Lena cut through the murk, landing a scathing remark. "We must move on. They'll converge on us soon. Remember, Amara, when you forged your decision, don't forget why." Amara's search for a path drew her over the dented hood of a ravaged car where broken remnants hinted at moments once so promising hope torn away, and now in bitter contrast, it was left dwindling. Rue's name lingered in her mind, a name from their war-torn past, painted with once bright hues of revenge. As Amara stood her ground, past echoes reassembled themselves into the only certainty remaining. That power always resides in the shadows, waiting. No true respite exists, for it cannot be vanquished. A cry for battle echoed through the city, the unearthly sound spreading rapidly, fueling Lena's raw emotion, fury begetting retribution. In the distance, shadowy forms crept according to the rhythm of Amara's heartbeat, heart pounding like a war drum, building intense anticipation. A storm brewed in Amara's eyes. It would form an impermeable scar once and for all. The storm finally broke free from the shackles of restraint as Lena approached her, an intense calm about her that belied the turmoil brewing beneath the surface. The warrior's usually unwavering demeanor now displayed glimpses of concern and, perhaps, ambition. "Amara, what's happening to us?" Lena asked, her voice struggling to maintain its crisp edge. "We're at each other's throats, and I'm wondering who's still holding on to their humanity." The walls of Amara's fortress, built to shield her from emotional pain, began to crumble. Trust, forged through shared trials and adventures, now threatened to splinter into 1,000 shards. She weighed her every word, knowing the fragile balance between civility and ferocity before it was too late. "We've lost something when our hearts became fueled by the fire of survival," Amara said, her voice reduced to a hesitant whisper, the weight of her emotions heavy in her chest. "Fear, once the spark that ignited resistance, has morphed into our guiding principle. True selflessness requires understanding that sometimes we must break free from bonds forged by others to avoid crushing under the weight of compassion and mercy." The sentiment hung in the air like a promise or a threat, inviting a silence that Lena couldn't seem to relinquish. For an eternity she stood motionless, her thoughts racing across the miles between the two combat-hardened sisters. A reflection flickered across her features, echoing the emotion of the fire within Amara's eyes. "Can we still stand together?" Lena asked finally, the words tinged with desperation. "Not just to keep the opposition from crashing over our heads, but to reclaim who we used to be." Amara evaluated her companion's loyalty with a heavy heart, unable to differentiate the truth from deception. Some possessed a loyal resolve, others remained unwilling prisoners of ulterior motives and motives. Each decided they'd rather die for that hollow promise that had once captured their heads. A melange of hopes and futility emerged as she perceived Lena's piercing question. "We stood as a team when the end loomed," Lena said firmly, as if pleading for surrender rather than conviction. "Why let that crumble so brutally now that there is opportunity for rebirth? We've got nothing left to lose, and if our people, corrupted by the past and blinded by resentment, can still join us and break free, I guess that deserves a chance. Have we lost sight of why we began this endeavor?" Amara found herself seeking the answers out, struggling desperately to distinguish between reality and her hallucinations. No reflection appeared, and yet another hazy piece was pieced together, reflecting Amara's faintly dim grasp of an alternate truth. As she pondered this cruel test of moral integrity and courage, she saw Lena's head twitch, and her eyes caught glimpses of burning fire-reflected images where light blazed beneath Amara's skin. Casting fears and loyalties reflected back, the rumble subsided, leaving behind an oppressive silence that was heavy with anticipation. Amara's grip on the fire in her palms tightened, her eyes scanning the desolate horizon for any sign of what was to come. She had anticipated this moment, the chaos that would erupt as the group's rivalries came to a head. Her eyes narrowed, her determination hardened. A sudden burst of wind whipped through the ravaged streets, scattering debris and debris into the air. The flickering lights of the perimeter fence seemed to beat out a rhythm, their rhythmic pulse pulsating through Amara's veins. Her ears strained, listening for the telltale sounds of approaching battle. A sound like the crackle of 1,000 dry bones echoed through the air, followed by the sharp chime of metal against metal. Amara's head snapped towards the noise, her eyes locking onto a ghostly figure emerging from the vortex of smoke and debris. It was Elijah, his eyes blazing with an unyielding fury, his sword flashing in the dim light. Amara's hand shifted, curled around the butt of her pistol, a sudden need to protect the boy that had been her anchor in this tumultuous world. His eyes, once warm and brilliant, now burned with a cold intensity, forged in the crucible of the group's dark politics. "You're a fool, Amara," Elijah spat, his voice laced with venom. "You think you can lead us to safety with your weak morals and your naive idealism." Amara's gaze never wavered, her eyes a mask of calm determination. "Elijah, we can't keep running. It's time we face the truth about ourselves and about this world we're fighting to survive in." The answer came in a flash of steel as Elijah lunged at her with a battle roar. Amara sidestepped, her pistol flashing in the dim light, its report echoing through the ruined streets. Elijah stumbled back, his eyes flashing with pain, his sword dangling from his grasp. A shadow swooped down, hovering just above the boy's head. It was Lena, her eyes blazing with a fierce light, her pistol trained on Elijah's battered form. "Don't move, Elijah," she growled, her voice firm. Amara shook her head, her mind reeling with conflicting emotions. What had happened to the boy she had once known, the one she had sworn to protect? She felt a chasm opening up within her, a void that threatened to consume her from the inside out. The darkness seemed to be closing in around them, and yet in this moment she knew they stood at the threshold of something incredible. The balance of power was precarious, the future uncertain, but Amara felt an unmistakable promise at her fingertips. "What do you want to do, Amara?" Lena asked, her voice a gentle whisper in a world torn apart by hatred and violence. Amara took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. "I want to reveal the truth, and I want to forge a new path. We can't keep running. We have to face the fact that our world is crumbling, and that we're all responsible for the ruin we've made. It's time we began to rebuild." As she spoke, the world around them seemed to shudder, as if the very foundations of reality were being reshaped. Amara felt a sense of determination rising within her, a sense of purpose that would guide her towards the unknown. "We have a choice to make," she continued, her voice ringing out across the desolate landscape. "We can cling to the past with all its hatred and despair, or we can forge a new future with all its unknowns and possibilities. I choose the latter." Lena nodded, her eyes locking onto Amara's. For the first time, Amara saw a glimmer of understanding, of support in Lena's eyes. As one they stood up together to face the gathering storm. She stood there, lost in the primal scream of the storm as it battered the very foundations of her being. The howling wind seared through her like a branding iron, leached of all moisture, leaving her dry and parched. Her breath caught in her throat, the metallic tang of fear clinging to it like a ripe mist. The two fractured lights hung crookedly in the distance, a bleak promise of salvation. Amara took another shuddering step forward, her calloused boots kicking up muddied waters that swirled in the turbulent current. Every move a testament to her frail will to survive, in a world where the difference between life and death was a hair's breadth away. She squinted at the lights, discerning the telltale signals guiding their path forward. It was as if the very fabric of reality had been reduced to its most raw and elemental form, forcing her to call upon every shred of stubborn determination left within her. A distant rumble shook the walls, the sound echoing through her mind like a battle cry, casting a shadow that stretched and chilled her to the bone. The whisper of power had infiltrated her thoughts, seeping into her marrow like Arctic ice. "Don't be fooled," a voice in her head whispered. "The storm will only intensify." And yet, like a moth drawn to a flame, Amara was inexorably drawn to the lights. She gritted her teeth, testing her mind and body, an unstable equilibrium she could no longer disguise. She was no rock beneath the onslaught, and yet a spark within her refused to dissipate. Her eyes flared bright with defiance as she faced the unknown, refusing to confront the darkness head-on. Alongside the driving force was an insidious struggle, constantly tearing her apart as every step forward threatened to dash her upon the unyielding rocks of reality. A cold reality that had stood idly watch as countless lives crumbled beneath its unforgiving might, while sparing no mercy for those left holding the scraps. She paused, weary as stone, her gaze settling upon the distant lights once more, searching for a glimmer of hope against the crushing tide. Tomorrow would probably bring another bout of merciless fighting against overwhelming odds, a never-ending cycle of pain that could be endured, only because she had mastered the art of finding strength in her weaknesses. For no one expected the same for Lena, the unbreakable fireman, feared by one and revered by another. And that was what should have caught Amara's attention, the quiet determination that she was driven to battle by. Unearthing hidden fears within the icy confines of her heart, darkness seeped into the cracks of the abandoned structure, crawling like a living thing into every shadowy recess. The flickering lights of the perimeter fence cast eerie silhouettes, while the screaming wind howled through the ravaged streets like a chorus of the damned. It was as if the very fabric of the world was unraveling, and Amara stood at the eye of the storm, her senses screaming for escape. She shivered, despite the fire crackling in her palms, its warmth unable to shake off the creeping chill. Her eyelids drooped, their weariness urging her to surrender to the void, but she fought it back, pleading with her exhausted body to linger. The fragile thread of her sanity threatened to snapped frequently by the turmoil swirling around her. Amara took a few shaky steps forward, her calloused boots squelching in the damp mud. Her fingers instinctively shifted, curled into a defensive grasp, each hand an extension of her unrelenting will to survive. Two fractured lights hung crookedly in the distance, flickering like fireflies swayed by a cruel breeze. She froze, squinting, trying to discern the telltale signals guiding their path forward. But even when the sun rises over the pitiful heaps of what once was, she muttered, aloud, a rasping sound that waked the fire in her core. It leaves scars on every soul we used to be. What do you want to call that? True selflessness, willing hearts surrendering their soul to destroy while other people live their lives trying to find refuge in their sacred slumber. This pain hurt, like too much, and that faint scar the dark corners are looking forward to see come out in the open, for in fear lies power. A distant rumble shook the walls, leaving Amara bracing herself against the harsh certainty that settled inside her like lead. Power does build, it spreads. The dark clouds gathered and gather before the storm, and their eyes are trained on her. Lena, our sharpshooting rebel. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, the distorted image of a torch casting them in an eerie, otherworldly light. Amara's gaze snapped towards them, a mix of trepidation and curiosity coursing through her veins. The figure drew closer, its form still indistinct until it stood before Amara with an unsettling clarity. It was Elijah, his eyes a piercing yellow, his expression twisted into a mixture of anguish and desperation. "Amara," he whispered, his voice like a cold breeze on a winter's night, "I've been searching for you." Amara's grip on her fire tightened, her senses on high alert as Elijah's words hung in the air like a challenge. "What do you want?" she spat, her voice a low growl. Elijah took a slow step forward, his movements deliberate and cautious. "I want to help you," he said, his voice trembling. "I know what's driving you, what's pushing you to the edge, but I also know what's waiting on the other side of that edge. And if you don't hold on to hope, if you don't find a way to reconcile your darkness with your light, you'll be consumed by it." Amara's gaze locked onto Elijah's, their eyes conveying a world of unspoken understanding. For a moment, the chaos around them receded, and all that remained was the whisper of Elijah's words, a gentle prodding towards redemption. "I'm not sure I know what that means," Amara admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, Elijah nodded, his expression etched with regret. "I can help you figure it out, but you have to trust me." Amara's mind reeled as Elijah's eyes seemed to hold an unspoken promise, a promise that the darkness would be tamed, that the light would shine through the cracks and guide her towards a new dawn. In that moment, Amara felt a glimmer of hope, a spark that refused to be extinguished. It was the first flame of a fire that would burn until she was saved, until she was free. And in the distance, the lights flickered one last time, illuminating the desolate landscape with a final, fading glow, a beacon that marked the beginning of the new journey. For Amara, a new path was unfolding, one that promised to wind its way through the shadows and into the light. It was a path fraught with peril and tedium, but also one that held the promise of redemption, of new beginnings. And as she stood there, the storm raging around her, Amara smiled, a fierce, determined smile that would see her through the darkness and into the unknown. But even as she did, a faint hum began to build on the periphery of her perception, a low, pulsing vibration that seemed to grow more intense by the second. And then, as if in response to some unheard signal, the lights flickered once more, this time into a steady, pulsing glow, a signal that sent a shiver of unease through Amara's very core. The end has not come yet.